So it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speech for this afternoon, which will be presented by Ms. Moana Eruera and Dr. Leland Ruwhiu, Principal Advisors Maori for New Zealand's Child, Youth and Family Services. And our presenters work closely with a wide range of leaders and agencies to implement an Indigenous and bicultural practice framework to guide all aspects of child, youth and families' work with mokopuna and whānau, that is Maori for children and families. I'm now going to be saying a large number of Maori words, which I'm going to very respectfully try and get the pronunciation right. I've been giving it a shot. If I get it wrong, please accept my apologies. Okay, so Moana's had more than 25 years' experience in social and community work and iwi projects. Her working career and vision has been spent committed to mokopuna, child safety and well-being, social work and social justice, human rights and the development of Maori and Indigenous people. She's published a number of articles and reports on Indigenous social work and research. Moana is of Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Ruanui, Ngāti Rangawewehe, Whakapapa, and Scottish-Irish descent lines. She's a proud mother of 2 boys and many other whānau she cares for. She's an active member of her whānau, hapu and iwi, and she's also just about completed her PhD. I was hoping to be able to sort of call her Dr. Eruera today, but I can't really get that in yet, but it's on its way, which is a great achievement. Now, our second presenter, Dr. Leland Ruwhiu, has spent over 30 years carving out a critical voice for Indigenous social work in Aotearoa, which has been balanced by raising a whānau and maintaining a lived experience in all aspects of well-being. He's a theorist, he's a poet, a writer, researcher, an innovator, a thinker, and most of all, a practitioner. Leland is of Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Poro, Ngāti Kahu Nunu, and Ngai Tahu Ki Morahaka Iwi tribal descent. And their address today is entitled Ngā te roa, ngā te rangi ane atea e tuku iho te aki mokopuna, actioning transformative states of Maori child welfare in New Zealand. Please welcome Moana and Leland to the stage.
Ka whakamau mahara e nei. Kia mahi whakakoi te wairua. Ka pāpaki ngā tai horonuku ki waho o manawa tāwhi. Ko te pūwā o te atua. Ko te kōrihi. Ko te tī oro oro. Ka toko ake he aha aua manu. Nā wai aua manu. Hua moana te karea tangaro ki tai. Kua ka mārangaranga ki tāhuna. Kori mako pai ki te kōtaratara. Pi waka waka ikuti ai te mate. Ko tuku rerenga tahi i te tau. Manuhiri koe tau mai rā koutou.
E ngā whatukura, e ngā mare kura, e ngā uri take koutou, e ngā karangaranga piki mai, ka ke mai rā. Tomo mai ki te papa hora nui, ki te kopu I puta ai te manako o ngai Māori take e. He tiriti, he tini hanga, kaore anō kia tau mai e. Pai atu I te ranga, tiratanga, haioranga, mo te iwi Māori e. Hi, ha, hi.
Ho honu kaharoa kia mai a rere atu hinui e. Te waka pehi a hei. Tēnei te karangi a koutou. Ngā whānau ko tai mai roto I tēnei o tātanei huihuinga. E tautoko ana mātou. Kato, hei awhi te aki ngā mokopuna. Tēnei te karangi a koutou ngā whānau ko tai mai roto I tō tātanei korowai. O tēnei o tātanei huihuinga. Tēnā koutou, kia ora nui tātou katoa. Look, great to be here. Moana and I, we've been practicing on both of those things that we decided to let the sound speak for itself. We've been really looking forward to sharing with you this day, and we've organised a presentation that will take you through a journey that we've been through, not only with child, youth and family, but also in terms of our own lives. So we'll start.
Kia ora kia koutou katoa. Ngā mihi whānui tēnei kia koutou kua tai, kia tautokohia ki tēnei kaupapa whakahirehira tō tātou nei mokopuna, nā reira, ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa. E taku iti kahurangi, taku tamahine puro tue, kua puta mai koe, ki te ao turo anei, nā umai, haere mai, haere mai. Our mokopuna. Our mokopuna carry the whakapapa, the genealogy of our people. Our mokopuna carry the aspirations of our whānau, our families. Our mokopuna are tapu, are sacred. Our mokopuna carry the legacy of our people. Our mokopuna are taonga, are treasures. Our mokopuna are looked after, are cared for. Our mokopuna are significant. Our mokopuna are beautiful. Our mokopuna are our treasures. Mokopuna, he aha tēnei āhuatanga o te mokopuna. Mokopuna is our word, is our kupu for our children who sit inside of our whakapapa, inside of our genealogy. Moko is often seen as tattooed on our faces or on our bodies, and often mokopuna are referred to as a reflection of our ancestors. So nā reira, mokopuna is the kaupapa of our kōrero today. So I just wanted to start, first of all, by just talking a little bit about mokopuna. And mokopuna from a wahine Māori or a woman's perspective. And so mokopuna, the greatest thing that we can do as women, or the greatest privilege that I've had, is to birth my children, my boys. And embedded inside of our collective histories as Māori people, we have many, many stories. We have many tikanga or protocol. We have many practices which tell us about the significance and about the way that Māori historically, inside of our culture, cared for, nurtured and looked after our children. So if we think about some of those things, and what our kōrero today is going to be thinking about, what are some of those things historically, traditionally, that we have inside our culture that we need to know, that we need to remember, that we need to be able to sit inside of today's society so that we can nurture our mokopuna as strong Māori inside today's world.
Te hohonutanga hoki o tērā, te tiakinga i te pepi. Kia kaua rawa te pepi e tukuna. Kia mahi kino ngea, ne? Te mahi kino kia hau, te waiho noiho, koia nahe. Engari, ki reira te whaia, ki reira te whanau, ki te ropi ropi, ki te hiki hiki, ki te whāngai, ki te horoi, ki te kakau i te pepi, ki te pikau haere anō hoki. Ira momo mai, he whakataunga i te mokopuna kia koe. He rite tonu ki te tiaki i tau pepi i whanau mai e, ne? Hiki nā ke koe, poipoia, ne? Moana koe te kupu poipoia, awhi awhi ngia, ne? Pātana kiri ki tāu, ne? Pāti kiri ki tāu. Muka te mātenga, ne? Pāte ringa, pāto kanui, pāki tō uma. Awhingia.
So whānau, that was a clip of Auntie Miri Hoani from Tai Tokiro, and what we've done just recently is we've had the privilege of interviewing kaumātua and koia around the motu, around the country, talking to us about traditional ways and practices and protocols, beliefs and values around how we care for our mokopuna. So Auntie Miri shared some kōrero with us last week about that.
Tokara rangi e te iwi e whakarongo mai rā e hara tāku hara mai e ko te hie hie mō te wiki tōria e ngari mō tāku hunara tangara e ngā tai tamariki e titiro rā kia kaha ki ngā mahi nei e ko tāku raka au e waha nei au e mō tāku hunara tangara e, mō tāku hunara tangara e. Moana provided you with an illustration of our wahine view on looking after our mokopuna. And I wanted to highlight something about that gentleman on the right there. His name is Hirini Tarapehu from a place called Waipiro Bay. He gave birth to a Harata Tarapehu, and she was the mother of Tu Whakiiri Ono McElroy, who was the father of my nana, who gave birth to my mother and her sisters. And I wanted to place that up there as a picture for all of us in this room to see. You know, I've been involved in this terrain of social and community work practice for a very long time. But one of the things that I remember strongly illustrated in my family was that there's always a role between, there's always a significant balance between male and female elements in the growing up of our young, our mokopuna. You know, we had a concept inside the development of child welfare in New Zealand, which talked about child-centred practice. Partly a very important point, but in the healing of our mokopuna and the caring for and loving and nurturing of our mokopuna, there's a role of that male element as well. A lot of us in this room here, you all know you have partners. I've been married to a beautiful woman, Nikki, hired to Ruwhiu for over 32 years, and even still I can't fully comprehend or understand the female element. But the beauty of it is if we capture the significance of these two elements coming together, there's a whole lot of power. I also want to highlight something else about caring for our mokopuna. Moana and I have tried to demonstrate in our role inside Child, Youth and Family, our role of that mare kura coming down to mana wahine, or the power, prestige, honour, the voice, the influence and the self-esteem of women, and also whatukura, the power, honour, prestige, place and influence and power of the male element. And in our stories of old, when we look back in our culture, and often these were called myths, less than thinking, but if we open these up, you'll discover that there was a very clear message given about whānau well-being for our mokopuna. And that message was depicted by the journey of a gentleman in our mythology, so to speak, called Tāne, who went through a huge journey of going up to the 12th heaven, Te Rangi Tūhaha, and in that space was given 3 baskets of knowledge to assist all those who are living in our world. And in those 3 baskets of knowledge, there are a range of skills, the arts, the esoteric knowledge, the skill sets to be able to look after and care for families. But they were also given 2 stones. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to name this presentation as a whole, you know, Rauroha and Rangiatea. These 2 stones were actually housed in 2 houses in that 12th heaven. And one of the houses was Rauroha, and out of that house came the stone that highlighted mare kura, mana wahine, the power, prestige, honour and influence of our women. And out of the house of Rangiatea in that same heaven came the stone of whatukura that moves down to manatane, that talks specifically about the power, honour, prestige and authority and influence of our tāne. So here, when we talk about whānau order in these days, we were given those 3 baskets of knowledge and these 2 stones to make sure that our young were cared for and looked after. Koe nā noho I te mihi, miharo i a koutou i tēnei rā. Just in finishing off, I'd like to introduce the next speaker. You've already had a little burst with Uncle Henare Kingi. His role was specifically in the past was on Te Rangi o Māori, and he talks about mokopuna te aki hoki.
Me pēni taku kōrero ko haupea te tahi o ngā mokopuna I roto I o tāu mātua, I whiwhi ki te āhuaranga o ngā manaakitanga. I pērā I taku kōrero I te mea, I roto tonu I te rohe I whānau mai ai a hau, he Māori katoa. He Māori katoa. Nā reira ko tahi anō kaupapa. Ko tahi anō kaupapa, ko te whāngai te mokopuna, kia tika te whāngai. Ko mātau e rā, ko ngā mātua, ko ngā karani pāpā, ko ngā karani māmā, ko e rātou ngā mātua he kai awhi katoa I te āhuaranga. O tō mātua ni whakatupura ngāke a rātou mokopuna. Ngāke kia mōhio te mokopuna ki tōna nei whakapapa. Kia mōhio te mokopuna ki ngā tikanga. Kia mōhio te mokopuna ki ngā kaupapa katoa e pāna ki te ao Māori. I whāngai a wahangia mai mātou. Nā koe I roto I te wāi a mātou e nohi nohi ana. Ka hore he pepa, ka hore he tuhi tuhi, engari ko te wahatonu. Kōrero tonu I te reo Māori.
One of the main messages that he left for us in that last verse was kōrero I roto I te reo Māori. In our business in child welfare and protection in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that resonates through the world. Everyone knows what that's talking about. But for Moana and I, one of the key things we needed to do when we came into Child, Youth and Family, we were asked to provide critical Māori voice at the decision-making table to reinforce what needed to happen to make sure that we're delivering effectively to our mokopuna. And so one of the key things that we had to do was look at our language and bring it right into that space. And so the next kōrero, after Uncle Henare and Whaia Meri had spoken, we had this whole notion around tiaki mokopuna. And I just want to highlight what tiaki mokopuna means. The word tiaki means to care for, to protect, to make safe, to support the development of and growth of our young. And as you can see here, we've highlighted that for us to really think in a transformative practice way, that we needed to make sure that these frameworks, Indigenous frameworks and practices found in traditional customary protocols are integrated in today's context. So it's not easy, whānau. Like I've been to conferences, I must admit when I finished my doctorate in 1999, for the next 2 years after that, I had to go to a lot of these places to give back, specifically to those people that supported the research journey that I was on. And that was all about well-being. But the voice of our Indigenous people were often missing. And there's something else that's tied into that. Often when you get into an environment where there are a lot of cultures that have come into a place that are like those birds that we talked about right at the beginning, they all came into one place and they became the manuhiri that came into this environment, into Aotearoa, New Zealand. I would still expect all of those who have come and made New Zealand their home to at least open up a space to understand their responsibility still to those Indigenous people that live in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so that is why we're saying that we want to reframe a lot of our thinking, bring back into that space solutions that are Indigenous orientated, descriptions of well-being, that language is also talked about. And when I told you about Tāne and how he went up to the 12th heaven and he brought all of those things down to look after the whānau order or the well-being of our families. Inside whānau order, we have mokopuna order to look after the well-being of our young. When we talk about wahine order, we're talking about the health and well-being of our women. When we talk about hau order, we're thinking about the physical health and well-being of our people. There, the language sits specifically right at the forefront, not as an afterthought.
So we just welcome you all today to this presentation and just really want to reflect for a minute on the theme of the conference. So what is cultural responsiveness in a multi-agency world? What is that? What is the construct that we think about when we think about culture? How does tangata whenua fit into our construct of culture? If we're in Aotearoa, what does that mean we do when we work with Māori? If we're in a multi-agency setting, what are the standards, the benchmarks, the decision-making tools and responses that we have when we're thinking about, have we considered tangata whenua in this piece of work that we're doing? So we want to share with you a framework that we are putting together with many of our kaimahi Māori and kaimahi tauiwi inside of our organisation, with some of our external stakeholder partners, and thinking about how is it that we work in a responsive way with Māori. Now, for those tangata whenua in the audience, we're thinking, we've been trying to work this out for years. So what's different now? What are you going to do that's different now inside the department? And those of you who remember Pu Aotearoa tū and some of those cultural responsive programs that have been inside our department over the last 30 years will know that there's been lots of really great things tried. So we want to share with you some of the ideas that we've put together with our staff and with our organisation around what does cultural responsiveness look like. We also want to challenge those of you who are in organisations who are working in collectively with other organisations. So, for example, when we're talking about multidisciplinary work, what does that mean when we have a social work registration who requires a particular cultural competence? We have a health practitioners association that requires different cultural competence. We have mental health, and we have a whole range of cultural competencies that don't necessarily require or align in the same way. How do we, in a children's team where we're working across culture, and we're working across agencies, how do we make that work with mana whenua in a way that reaches the standards of our mana whenua of that area? These are really big questions for us to tackle here in Aotearoa, and I'm sure they are also questions for those of you who've come from Australia and other parts of the world. So we just would like to share some insights, a little bit of work that we've been doing around the design and thinking about implementation around what does our statutory work look like when we're working with mokopuna and whānau Māori. So what we would like to just start with is a kōrero about mokopuna. So when a baby is born, and those of you who have had your own children and those of you who have grandchildren or nieces and nephews know the absolute joy that we have when we have a new baby. From a Māori perspective, that baby is born with whakapapa, genealogy, born with tapu, sacredness, born with mana, absolute unique potential, born with wairua, a connection with spirituality, born with a whole range of constructs from our cultural worldview. So that when we work with mokopuna who have been violated, and everybody in the room, I'm assuming, is working with some children or young people who have been violated in some way. The way that we think about violation in my part of the country, from my iwi, is that often we talk about the violation of tapu, or the sacredness of that child. So if that's the way that we view that, then there's particular ways that we use to restore that tapu. So for working with mokopuna Māori, often there are our constructs and our ways of understanding what is abuse from our worldview. What is that construct? What is our whakaaro or our ideas about what safety is? So an example, abuse for mokopuna Māori may be the disenfranchisement from our iwi or our whakapapa. So that if we were going to work with that mokopuna, it would be around trying to strengthen that connection with whakapapa and identity.
One of the difficulties that we often have is really talking at the border with our language. You know, there's been some pretty good language laid down today about the expertise that you hold. No, when you speak in your world. And what I want to show you is there's also expertise that sits in our language, in our world, and the way that we see the world. So I'm going to explain mana for you. Now everyone knows, and there's ex-students out here, we've done this before, there's no difference about this exercise in the rooms when we're training you as versus in a conference. But I'm going to make sure that everyone knows what mana is. So here we have our brother, Adam. Payback now, these Aussies thrashed us, bro. Okay, so here we go. One of you are going to represent, what would be the 3 key distinctive areas that people would use to describe their worldview? Pretty intelligent people out here, so let's see. What do you think would be one of the areas that they would talk about when they're describing their worldview? Culture, culture, gender, we're talking about people, really, yeah. From any relationship that we might have with people. So there's a human element that we all talk about, no matter how those relationships are formatted. What else do we have? What's the other dimensions that we talk about? Okay, the spiritual dimension, which often highlights what? Often highlights that whole point around our values and our beliefs and our ideologies. All of those things encompassed in that space. And then there's one more area. And all of us, we go to these places when we're, sorry, excuse the language, when we're tired. We get ourselves reinvigorated in these places, and often it's the natural environment. That's why I had to move these a little bit in your seats, so that you could actually reinvigorate your space to keep your energy up for today. So we've got some more of our whānau after this doing a presentation as well. So, if we look at those 3 key areas, which one of these is going to be the natural environment? Paul. No, not you. You're the person we're talking about. Okay. Paul is representing all things in the natural environment. Tell me what is in the natural environment that we've got here today. Yeah, we've got the trees, the rivers, the mountains, all of those things. Our home turf. Okay, who's going to be the spiritual dimension? If we have the spiritual dimension, the Wainua dimension, all those values and those beliefs that are important to us, and we have naturally the people dimension, the human dimension. Okay, brother, stand up. You're the first victim today. Awesome. So, human dimension. Who's the human dimension? Okay, come here. So in the human dimension, we have what? That connects. How do you feel like now, brother? Awesome. Under the, oh, you do. Well, that's great. You're going to be even more awesome after this. So here we have, what type of relationships do you have in the natural environment? He has his parents, his loved ones, significant people. What other things that exist in this space? There's usually male, female relationships, all those things that sit in the human dimension. Paul, natural environment. So in the natural environment, where do you come from, brother?
Geelong.
Geelong. He comes from Geelong. And how long were you in Geelong?
Long enough.
But look at this, often in Geelong, there'll be things like a connection to rivers, to lakes, to the beach, to the shopping centre, wherever in the natural environment. Okay. And at the back, we also have some of his key values. His key... Usually Whananga, they go on top of the shoulders. So, I wanted to explain something to you here. Often when we get people, they have all of these things around them. The difficulty is sometimes they don't fully comprehend or understand the links they have in the human environment, in the natural environment, and even struggling with some of their values and beliefs. If we were to look at this here, if we were to think of mana as the cultural adhesive that binds Adam to people. So this comes into play with words like mana wahine, the power and prestige and the connection point we have with women. Mana mokopuna. In our language, that word mana is embedded in all those different relationships that we have with people. Likewise, in the natural environment, you see us get up and we say, ko manga harari te maunga te tare hua. Ko mō haka te awa. So what I'm saying to you is, manga harari is my mountain. Mohaka is my river. And I could go on and talk about all those connection points in the natural environment. And guess what? Every single one of those connection points, the river has mana. Why? It's a connected cultural adhesive that binds this identity of this one person in front of you. Likewise, he has rivers and beaches and all of those things that he connects with. And at the back there, we often talk about mana atua, but when we say mana atua, we're also opening up that whole space to learning, to those things that are significant to us. Watch this. So our young, some of them don't know who their parents are. Some of them struggle to find out who they can link in and identify with. They might not know where their people come from. They might have struggles with some of the values and beliefs that hold them together. And this is the thing I want to leave you with today about mana. Mana takes expertise to be able to engage effectively so that you don't trample on someone's mana. That you actually assist in that journey that Moana talked about making sure that we redress those places where mana and tapu have been violated and trampled on. Thank you.
So if you think about that demonstration and about Adam standing in the middle there, when he was born, he had connections with whenua, with land. He was born with connections to wairua, with spirituality, and he was born with connections to his natural environment, values and beliefs. When our tapu is violated, those things are severed often. So some of that violation is around how those things are severed, and part of our role is about restoration of those things, so the mana or the potential of that baby or that mokopuna or that young person can be realised. So mana and tapu sit together. They're really key constructs in the way that we work with mokopuna Māori and whānau Māori. But to understand them and to understand how you work with them, you need to have a really good working knowledge of what they are.
So we wanted to echo to you some of the voices of those whānau of ours throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand, that gave a contribution specifically back to child, youth and family to assist in that journey of being able to care for, to protect, to safeguard, to support the development of our young.
Ka kōrero hau mo taku kuia tūpuna, a ngā huia tīpeka o Mairangi. I tūpu mai a hau, i tōna taha. Nāna i ako i a hau ngā kōrero, ngā whakapapa, ngā ture, ngā tikanga, e pāna ki a hau ki te Māori, o toku iwi, pēheana ki ngā mahi runga ngā marae, e rā mea e pāna ki ngā tamariki, pēheana ki te tiaki a hau, i te wā ka tupu ake a hau, me ka haere a hau ki runga ngā marae, pēheana ki te awhi, ki te manaki ngā pakeke, ngā kaumātua, me haratana ki a hau, me waiwai, ko koe taku waiwai, o ku waiwai, o ku ringaringa, no reira me pēnā koe ki ngā kaumātua. No reira, e nei āhuatanga, me ka mea katoa e whakaro ana hau, ko taku kuia hau I ārahi.
All our whānau that lived together, we shared everything. That's how we lived. My father was sharing. Much of the time my mum was home, left with all of us. We also knew what freedom was. That was freedom for us. We were poor, but we didn't know it. We didn't have money because we didn't know what money was. We had kai, we had food, we had family. In those times, all our families knew each other. And it wasn't anything to just call in because we all lived together and we all had big families, and that's how we survived too. And then we moved into the cities because that's where the work took us, and that's what separated everybody. We moved into town, whole new different thing. Houses were close together, they had fences. We weren't brought up with fences, we were free. They had fences. So what we did as children, and we must have been, people perceived us as being naughty. We weren't naughty, we were just adventurous. The mana o tūroa, you know. We'd climb over the fence because that's what fences were for, we'd climb over.
So your whānau on the other side.
Yeah, and so because we couldn't see the whānau, so what we'd do, go and climb up on the neighbour's roof so we can see what's around us. Oh, we knew the orchard down the road. To go down there, have kai, because we collected fruit when we were kids. We had fruit trees. We had the water. We knew how to, as children, we knew how to collect kai. We knew how to survive. We knew the rules of the way. We knew the rules of tangaroa. We knew the rules of the ngahere. We knew to stay together, and we did. We used to go off on our, and go and collect kai and do what we did.
It wasn't exactly the way that I was brought up. My mum was a very strong disciplinarian. My dad was the soft touch. And so, but that's something that we decided on with our mokos, that they can come and they can just run riot in the house. It don't matter. They must be safe. They must be loved. What we've decided in our home, and it wasn't a big decision, but our house, like here, you don't even have to live here to feel it. That when our kids, our mokos come into the home, it's safe, it's loved.
So one of the things that we wanted to do was whāriki a little bit, to lay down a map. One of the things that I learned while going through my studies was, to develop your teeth, your critical teeth, you had to have a very strong analysis of the history. And we're going to do it in our styles with some, what are these called? Words? I'm thinking the young people, they call
Spoken word.
the spoken word. We're just not as fancy as our young in doing this, but we're going to have a go, okay? We'll have a go. And for a lot of you who are from other parts of the world, we're only touching the surface of some of the historical things that have happened to us that have impacted on the health and well-being of the vision that we have around looking for our young, looking after our young.
I can think Māori, be Māori, act Māori, live Māori, feel Māori.
War, law, and confiscation left me landless.
Your political Westminster system continued to marginalise me, leaving me without a voice.
Your epidemics took our loved ones, and your welfare system stole our children from their whakapapa rights.
When you strapped my parents for speaking te reo Māori, our language, we, their children, lost our native tongue.
You made me a criminal when we sat in peaceful protest.
Decolonised our minds and souls, left us reclaiming our space with places to stand in our own right.
No longer do I come to meet you at the border as an unequal partner. I assert my sovereignty, and I contribute fully as Māori who think, act, live, and feel Māori. Yeah, so that's our whāriki historically. You can do all your studies and, check out in the historical books and read people's writings about it, but there's a lot of depth inside there. If you really open up those things, you can understand why our whānau would lay down their thoughts to assist this organisation to strengthen its ability to be able to deal with our mokopuna.
So post-colonisation trauma impacts our whānau ability to care for our babies.
This one is really just to look and listen. Well, what is this all for, though? You know, we want improved outcomes for our mokopuna, really. That history is a whāriki to us, plus the current state of our particular organisation isn't done alone. There's a huge range of non-government organisations, communities, whānau, families that are doing their bit to redress this as a whole. But nonetheless, the things that we're really wanting at the end of the day are listed there. You know, probably the one I'll talk about is just the improved Māori experience of our services. I want to say it in this fashion. You know, we've got a huge service. There's about 3,000 employees, about 1,000 social workers. There's about 300 who are tangata whenua. That's the Indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And there's about 700 of our staff members that we highlight under the label of tauiwi, who have inside that space, some of them have got some excellent skills of engagement. When we talk about biocultural practice as Indigenous people, we're talking about those who aren't Māori that are able to effectively engage with our people. Bringing those two bodies together, we're asking not so much for like 50-50 in terms of practitioner work, though we wouldn't mind a few more, but nonetheless, we're actually asking our workforce to up their game. You know, a lot of you spend a lot of time, you know, in your training. And that's why I love the kōrero of Kate this morning, when she's talking about, you know, the right of our practitioners to be able to think innovatively, creatively, to be able to feel through the engagement with people, to be able to understand that that is invaluable, that science is important, but likewise, that intuitive learning and strength that one has should not be minimised. So I'll leave that with you. You all know at the end of the day, if you look at the others, that we're really wanting to strengthen their baseline.
So those of our babies who are engaged with our service often find themselves inside a whole range of things that are happening for agencies, for NGOs, for communities. So we've just put down there some things that mokopuna Māori might find themselves in the middle of. So they'll have their own whānau aspirations, and Kate talked about family practices, and what are family practices, and what are our own Māori whānau cultural practices that we have as a whānau, that we have as an iwi. There's lots of Māori service providers, but what's our bicultural practice looking like? What's our practice between non-Māori and working with Māori? How are we doing in that space? We've had a lot of history around Puao Te Atatu. We have lots of new legislation, the Vulnerable Children's Act, and lots of other initiatives. So many of our mokopuna are in the middle of agencies, NGOs and providers, all working through those things.
I just want to put a little personal touch to it. That little boy in the middle is Nikki and I. That's our grandson. That's our, yeah, Nikki's giving me the fingers now. Third child, third mokopuna. But I just want to explain something here. That was a very difficult situation for us when our son came home and he says, "Oh, Dad, Mum, I think my ex-girlfriend's hapu." Now, hapu means pregnant. And I said, well, what do you mean you think? She's hapu. And then the next question that comes, how far on is she? Oh, 6 months, and I'm not quite sure if the baby's mine, and I'm looking at our son. But you know, that whole kōrero about how whānau, you know, when Kate gave the kōrero this morning, she was talking about the resilience factor inside that space with families. Nikki and I knew straight away, as parents, knowing fully well that we had a moko, a grandchild, a grandson, or we didn't know it was a grandson at the time, but a grandchild coming. We knew that it was our role as grandparents to start the tū honotanga. In other words, to start doing the connections. And it meant going out to meet this young woman and her family. Naturally, they weren't too happy with my son, and were thinking things about our family for not making contact. But it's been a huge journey. He's now, I'm watching her fingers now. Oh, he's now 3.5. He's now 3.5, and some of the characteristics that embedded him right now, he's got excellent balance. It's something that I've passed down to my children. Yeah. But whānau, that's the other part I think that sometimes we as professionals forget about. That is that our lives provide a map. And whether or not we're successfully combined the learning and the research and all of those things in our workspace to be able to have that story, to be able to look at an environment and be able to contribute in that space. You know, for a while there, we were in that position where he lived over in Melbourne. Were you Australians? He lived in Melbourne. And the young woman was not with our son, and she had established a relationship with another young man, and that was a very, very difficult situation. You know, when you've got someone that's starting to, you know, use children to blackmail partners, things like that. And, you know, here Nikki and I, she's a teacher and I'm a social worker, and I had my mates, you know, Moana, we were all talking about what would be the best thing to do, and I was thinking, well, in the old days, I probably would have gone over for a trip. But the point I'm saying again is that well-being and wellness of our mokopuna involves navigating skillfully those hard terrains. And I like this, you know, all of us went for training. You know what that looks like, eh? Systemic theory. All of us know that, eh? I liked it when I first saw it too. But the point is, smack bang in the middle of that space, our mokopuna.
So this is our third year working as Principal Advisors Māori for Child, Youth and Family. And we just wanted to run through a little bit of the journey about what the design and what the framework that we've been working on looks like. So to start with, we did a huge amount of work internally with our own staff. So we have 700 odd Māori staff, not all social workers, and working around the country, talking to our Māori staff about what is it that you already do, what can we build on, where are the gaps. So we started there with our Māori staff.
I think what I want to talk to you about, I'll just talk to this part. What I want to talk to you about here is that for me it was an acknowledgement of something significantly raised in my family where I saw the value of mare kura, whatukura working together, a male and a female element working together. Moana in her own right has her own mana, and likewise so do I. But like I told you before, differences. And one of the key differences that I had was I find it really difficult at times having to get really down into the nitty-gritty detail. Things like water for duck's back sometimes when it comes to having to deal with issues. And Moana and I took the time, quality time, to sit down, thrash out, talk through what would be guiding our work inside Child, Youth and Family if we were going to provide this organisation with strategic, high-level, critical Indigenous advice in that game, in that space. And so those principles right in the middle, those three principles up there right in the middle, came out of a lot of heartfelt discussion and dialogue.
So the first one, Te Aki Mokopuna.
Well, I've already given you the kōrero about Te Aki, you know, to care for, to safeguard, to protect, to support the development of our young. But Te Aki Mokopuna means of those, when you think of mokopuna in our language, Moko is like that tā moko, you know, the tattooing that you see that highlights the genealogy and whakapapa of our ancestors. And when you look into a pool, if our young people were to look into a pool, what they would see are reflections of their ancestors. So that's why that language became really important. And it was really a struggle for us coming into Child, Youth and Family, knowing fully well in 2012, there was still a very strong acknowledgement of child-centred work. Not to say that it's wrong, but child-centred work, and also the paramountcy of the child. We know where in some ways that came from if you track the history of child welfare in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But what we were saying was that you cannot discount that other element, the element that child belongs in a space. While we might find that the immediate adults around that space might not be healthy, it doesn't stop us from actually exploring fully all the dimensions of the connect points with that child. Now, I know I don't often do this in international conferences, because I haven't been to too many. But the one thing that I know is that when you think of a mokopuna and you take the time to do your research around who that mokopuna belongs to, there are some healthy people in those lines, and it takes work.
So we had 3 principles that we were working on when we were putting together this work. So Te Aki Mokopuna was the first one. The second one is Mana Āhua Ake, and those of you from Aotearoa who know Whairose Peri's work will know of this construct of Mana Āhua Ake. So it's really the closest thing that we can get to being child-centred, that child's absolute uniqueness, their own skills, their own natural attributes. You know, me and my sister are related, but we're really quite different in the strengths and the things that we have that are uniquely ours. So Mana Āhua Ake recognises that inside of our mokopuna. And the last principle is called Te Ahureitanga. And Te Ahureitanga recognises that as Māori, we have some things that we all connect with, but that actually inside of our own iwi and inside of our own whānau, there are lots of things that are uniquely ours. So I'm from Ngāpuhi. We have our own way, our own dialect, our own way of speaking, our own ways of doing things, tikanga, kawa, protocols. So Te Ahureitanga recognises that as we work throughout the motu, throughout the country, we need to recognise those things and be responding in different ways.
Yeah, it's all right to come up with something like that, you know, like inside your own workspace. You know, are you working in a principled fashion? And I just want to say that I remember going to Massey University, and the first lecture I went into, they were doing this exercise, who we're going to leave out of the bomb shelter. You know, and I mean, we just came straight off the street, so to speak, and, you know, there were things that, you know, people that we would have thrown out, but there was a whole lot of discussion because everyone had different views. And, well, the reason why I'm raising that to you is likewise when you think about the work that Moana and I have had to do, we've had to sit down and really work out what's going to guide us in this space, and we believe that principles can help guide us in that space. And I don't want to belabor this other than to say to you there are 2 things you can read about our thinking around Te Aki Mokopuna. You have those that are sitting down. There would have been articles shared. We've left an article on the seats. And we've also left some detail around the construction of an Indigenous and biocultural principled framework, in brackets strategic for leadership and practice for practitioners. And in the development of the methodology, these are the results of those principles.
So these constructs were worked through with our staff. So we were asking them the question about what is it that you already do when you're working with whānau Māori. We've purposely used our reo, our language. We believe that the language is transformational, that if you have a really good understanding of the language and the concepts inside the language, that you can transform practice.
And all we're asking that you consider are some questions. And we're going to take you through one of the principles.
Whakamanawa for me, I think about my mum. But my mum in her 50s, she wanted to learn te reo Māori, so she did that. And it was good modelling for me. The other part was Motua Gardens in Wanganui. So back in that day, there was a really big time where the council wanted to own that land, and what she did was she went there in her 60s. She stayed there for the whole time that they occupied that land. And I took a holiday from work when I found out so that I could take over a bed, look after her, make sure she had food. And I think the modelling that she showed there with that whakamanawa, that being brave enough to be there and support those Māori things in a time when people didn't want to know.
Another thing that was really strong within this was righting the wrongs. So in terms of being able to, like whakamanawa, was about empowering the whānau throughout the process, but also empowering them because actually the wrong that we had done had actually stumbled on their mana. So we wanted to be able to actually restore their mana. And again, when you look at all the principles, the whole process of how we went around that, they all weave in together and actually do restore the mana of the whānau.
So whānau, just to finish off, just want to give some practical examples of what the principles might look like inside of our work, and the examples that you'll probably recognise yourselves. So in our whānau, just recently my dad turned 75, and we were lucky enough to have a lovely whanaunga of ours who carved him a rākau whakapapa. And that rākau whakapapa is like a tokotoko, or it's a stick, like a walking stick that they use. It has 10 notches on it, and each of those notches represent a different line of whakapapa, so 10 generations of genealogy. And it was a beautiful thing, him getting it, but one of the things that our whānau have to work out about having that is about how do we first of all research 10 generations. Some whānau are lucky enough to already know 10 generations and others aren't. So how do we, first of all, access that knowledge? Then how do we transmit that between generations? So one of my sons is really good at remembering stories. So he's likely to be the one that will be taking care of transmitting that whakapapa through down to our new babies. And we're fortunate enough to have that and to be able to have the whānau and have people together who can think about those things. So most of the mokopuna that we work with in our work, they don't know those things. They don't have the benefit of being able to talk to grandparents who can feed them that kind of knowledge. So how do we construct, how do we wrap around those mokopuna that we work with who don't have the benefit of those things? How do we reconstruct those connections? How do we research and strengthen them back into their own whakapapa, into their own genealogy? So for our staff, that's a really big challenge. Another one of the challenges is around things like, if I meet somebody and their name is Whetu Marama, I have a really good idea that that particular mokopuna might be of in the Rātana faith, because that's one of our names, that's one of our words, that's one of the things that we recognise inside those beliefs. So you need a certain level of insight into Māori beliefs, into Māori hāhi, to know that. So once I know that, it opens up a really huge window for me around how I work with that whānau, how I know what kinds of beliefs that they have, and that gives me insight into what I need to do. That's a particular knowledge base, that's a particular level of competency around knowledge and skills for working with Māori. So in our framework, we would like to develop a 3-level tiered competency process where we look at what is the benchmark that we would expect everybody to know, what are the things we expect you all to be able to do when you work with my whānau, when you work with my mokopuna, what would I expect of you? Who would you access in my family? How would you do that? And then up to an advanced practitioner. So what does an advanced practitioner working with Māori look like? What are they able to do? How fluent should their language and their reo be? How are they able to move and work tikanga? So those are really big challenges for us, big challenges for our staff. We're really lucky at the moment in the wider social work sector that there's a lot of work being done on competency to work with Māori across our sector. So that's exciting, that's happening at the same time, so we can do some alignment there about what that means. Nā reira, kānui te mihi kia koutou katoa, ko tai ki te mutunga o tēnei wā, ka hoa tua hau ki tōku hoa.
I'll let our kaumātua's images speak to you. When we're looking for people to reinvigorate our thinking, to allow us to be creative and to be innovative, then we still have a lot of these people here with us. Ai, kia ora tātou.